In 1895, Alva Vanderbilt walked away from her marriage with a settlement worth $10 million. A Newport mansion built from 500,000 cubic feet of marble, and custody of her 3 children. It was the most spectacular divorce in American history. But what nobody reported was this. Before she could hire a lawyer, before she could file a single document, Alva Vanderbilt needed to solve a problem that every unhappy wife in America shared. Under the law that governed her marriage, she did not legally exist. Every dollar she touched belonged to her husband. Every contract she signed was void. She was, in the precise language of the courts, civilly dead. And a dead woman cannot sue for divorce. So how did she do it? How did any of them do it? Chapter 1. The law that made wives disappear. On the day a Gilded Age woman signed her marriage certificate, she signed away her legal existence. This was not metaphor. It was statute. Under the doctrine of coverture, inherited from English common law and woven into the legal fabric of every American state, a married woman ceased to be a separate legal person the moment she said her vows. Sir William Blackstone had laid it out with chilling clarity in his commentaries on the laws of England more than a century earlier. The husband and wife are one person in law, he wrote. That one person was the husband. What this meant in daily practice was total. A married woman in the 1880s could not own cash. She could not sign a contract. If she worked, her wages belonged to her husband. If her father died and left her an inheritance, the money passed immediately into her husband's control. She could not lease a room. She could not execute a will. She could not sue or be sued. She could not testify against her husband in court. In the language of the law, she was covered by her husband's legal identity, the way a lid covers a pot. Her name disappeared. Her agency disappeared. Her money disappeared. Now consider what this looked like inside a Fifth Avenue mansion. A wife in the household of a Vanderbilt or an Astor managed a domestic operation of staggering scale. The annual budget for running a great New York house ranged from $50,000 to $100,000 per year. This covered a staff of 20 to 40 servants, daily provisioning for a household that might entertain 200 guests in a single evening, and maintenance of a building that consumed coal, ice, flowers, and linen in industrial quantities. The wife oversaw all of it. She approved menus. She directed the housekeeper. She managed the social calendar that determined her husband's business alliances. But she controlled none of the money that paid for it. Every bill went to her husband or to his secretary for approval. Every account was held in his name. The grocer, the florist, the dressmaker, the coal merchant, all submitted invoices to the man of the house. The wife was a manager with no authority, an executive with no budget, a general who commanded an army she could not pay. The Married Women's Property Acts had begun to change this on paper. New York passed its first version in 1848. Mississippi had passed one even earlier, in 1839. By the 1880s, most states had some version of these laws on the books. They gave married women the right to own property they brought into the marriage, and, in some states, to keep their own wages. But the reality lagged decades behind the statute. Enforcement was inconsistent. Judges interpreted the acts narrowly. And for the vast majority of married women, especially those in the upper classes who did not work for wages, the acts were meaningless. They had no separate property, because their families had transferred their dowries to their husbands at marriage. They had no wages because they did not work. The law gave them rights they had no economic means to exercise. This was the elegant cruelty of the system. It did not need chains. It did not need walls. It needed only the absence of money. A wife could theoretically walk out the front door of her mansion at any moment. No one would physically stop her. But where would she go? She could not sign a lease. She could not check into a hotel without a man to vouch for her. She could not hire a lawyer because she could not enter a contract. She could not access a bank account because she did not have one. The door was unlocked, but her pockets were empty. And an unlocked door means nothing to a woman with nowhere to go. Chapter 2. Marble Walls and Golden Cages. The Vanderbilt mansion at 660 Fifth Avenue cost $3 million to build and housed a woman who could not legally own a hairpin inside it. The 1880s and 1890s were the zenith of American dynastic marriage. The families with new industrial fortunes and families with old social standing exchanged their most valuable assets, money for lineage, in matches choreographed with the precision of military campaigns. The Vanderbilts, whose fortune came from railroads, needed social legitimacy. The British aristocracy, whose estates were hemorrhaging cash, needed American dollars. The brides were the currency. Consider the marriage of Consuelo Vanderbilt to Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, in November of 1895. The wedding at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue drew crowds that required police barricades. The bride's dress had been made in Paris. The guest list read like a census of American wealth, and the financial terms were blunt. Consuelo's father, William Kissam Vanderbilt, had transferred $2.5 million in railroad stock to the Duke at the time of the marriage. The annual income from this stock, roughly $100,000, was earmarked for the upkeep of Blenheim Palace, the Duke's crumbling ancestral seat in Oxfordshire. Consuelo herself received nothing. The money went from her father to her husband. She was the conduit, not the recipient. She later wrote that she had wept on the morning of her wedding and that her mother, Alva, had forced her to go through with it. Whether this account was literal or literary, it captured a truth that resonated across the Gilded Age. The bride's feelings were the least important variable in the equation. The world these women inhabited was dazzling in its material excess. Marble House, Alva Vanderbilt's Newport cottage, cost $11 million to build and furnish, a figure that would translate to roughly $350 million today. Its entrance hall was modeled after the Petit Trianon at Versailles. Its dining room contained bronze chairs so heavy that servants had to pull them out for guests. Its kitchen could prepare a dinner for 200. 36 servants maintained the house during the summer season, which lasted roughly 10 weeks. The cost of operating Marble House for those 10 weeks exceeded the annual income of most American families by a factor of 100. And yet the woman who reigned over this spectacle was, in the eyes of the law, a dependent. She could instruct the chef to prepare a 12-course dinner for the cream of Newport society. But she could not write a personal check for $5. She could commission a portrait of herself in diamonds and pearls, but she could not sell a single stone without her husband's permission. The social season itself was a machine of enforced display. From November to February, the great families of New York hosted a relentless sequence of balls, dinners, opera evenings, and afternoon teas, each one calibrated to demonstrate wealth and status. A single ball could cost $25,000 to $50,000. The annual wardrobe required for participation, including evening gowns, afternoon dresses, visiting costumes, and furs, could run from $10,000 to $30,000. Mrs. Astor's famous ballroom held exactly 400 guests, a number that defined the social elite. To be excluded was social death. For the wives, this system was both a stage and a cage. It demanded their constant performance while denying them any independent means. Every gown was chosen to reflect the husband's wealth. Every party was staged to advance the husband's alliances. The wife was the visible face of a fortune she could not touch. The paradox was total. The most lavishly adorned women in America were also the most financially powerless. Their diamonds were worth fortunes. Their signatures were worth nothing. And if the marriage turned cruel, if the husband drank or struck or humiliated, if the alliance that had been arranged for money became a daily experience of misery, then the wife faced a choice that was not really a choice at all. She could endure, or she could try to leave a house she was legally unable to fund her departure from. The question was not whether these women wanted to escape. The question was how. Chapter 3. The Price of Walking Out the Door. A woman who wanted to leave her husband in 1895 needed at minimum $5,000 she was forbidden from having. That figure was not arbitrary. It was the floor, the bare minimum required to initiate a divorce proceeding in New York and sustain oneself through the months or years of legal combat that followed. For a contested case involving a wealthy husband, the real number was far higher. $20,000, $50,000, sometimes more. Start with the lawyer. A competent divorce attorney in 1890s. New York charged between $500 and $5,000 for an uncontested case. For a contested divorce involving a prominent family, in substantial assets and allegations of adultery or cruelty, the fees could reach $20,000 or more. And these fees had to be paid up front or guaranteed by someone other than the wife, because the wife, under coverture, could not enter a binding contract for legal services. A lawyer who accepted a married woman as a client without some form of independent financial guarantee was taking a risk that most attorneys were unwilling to assume. Then there was housing. A woman who left her husband's home needed somewhere to live. Renting a modest but respectable apartment in New York in the 1890s cost between $3,000 and $5,000 per year. A furnished house suitable for a woman of social standing cost more, between $5,000 and $15,000 annually. And respectability mattered. A divorced woman living in reduced circumstances attracted gossip that could destroy whatever social standing she hoped to retain. The appearance of financial stability was not vanity. It was survival. But here was the most formidable expense of all: geography. New York, throughout the Gilded Age, permitted divorce only on the grounds of adultery, not cruelty, not abandonment, not habitual drunkenness, only adultery, and it had to be proven with evidence that could withstand a hostile cross-examination. For a woman married to a man who was discreet about his affairs, or whose cruelty took forms other than infidelity, a New York divorce was nearly impossible. The alternative was migratory divorce. Several Western states and territories offered broader grounds for divorce and, crucially, shorter residency requirements. The most famous of these was South Dakota. Beginning in the 1880s, South Dakota required only 90 days of residency before a petitioner could file for divorce. The state offered grounds that included cruelty, neglect, habitual intemperance, and desertion, categories that covered the vast majority of marital grievances that New York ignored. But 90 days in Sioux Falls was not cheap. The train fare from New York to South Dakota was approximately $40 one way, a modest sum. The real cost was sustaining oneself in a frontier city for 3 months. Room and board at the Cataract House, the hotel where most divorce seekers stayed, ran $3 per day, or roughly $270 for the 90-day minimum. A private house rental was more. Add in legal fees for a South Dakota attorney, ranging from $500 to $3,000, and the cost of maintaining a New York residence simultaneously, and the total bill for a migratory divorce could reach $5,000 to $10,000. For a contested case with complications, it could be considerably more. Let those numbers sit for a moment. The average American family in 1895 earned between $400 and $600 per year. A teacher earned $300 to $500. A factory worker earned $200 to $400. The cost of a Gilded Age divorce was, for most women, the equivalent of 10 to 20 years of an ordinary person's income. And for a married woman under coverture, who could not legally possess a single dollar, the task was not merely expensive, it was structurally impossible. The system had been designed this way, not consciously perhaps, not as a deliberate conspiracy, but the effect was the same. The law made women financially dependent. Financial dependence made escape unaffordable, and unaffordable escape made the marriage permanent. This was the trap. Elegant, total, and nearly inescapable. Nearly. Because across the drawing rooms and kitchens and servants' quarters of Gilded Age New York, women were already working on the problem. They had been working on it for years. They had found the cracks in the system, and they were exploiting them, 12 cents at a time. Chapter 4. The household ledger had a second set of books. The most common weapon against coverture was a grocer's bill inflated by exactly 12 cents. Not $1, not 50 cents, 12 cents, because 12 cents would not attract attention. 12 cents on a weekly bill of $18 or $20 was invisible, a rounding error that no husband or secretary would question. But 12 cents a week was $6.24 a year. And a woman running a Fifth Avenue household did not submit one bill per week. She submitted dozens. The grocer, the butcher, the florist, the coal merchant, the laundress, the chandler. If she inflated each one by a small, varying amount, and if the tradesman agreed to return the difference to her in cash, a married woman could accumulate several $100s per year without leaving a single trace in her husband's accounts. This was the most widespread method of secret financial accumulation available to Gilded Age wives, and its genius lay in its ordinariness. Household account management was women's work. Husbands delegated it. Secretaries trusted it. No one audited a grocer's bill with the same scrutiny applied to a stock transaction. The domestic sphere, the very domain to which coverture confined women, became the site of their financial resistance. Court records from divorce proceedings and separation trials of the era reveal this practice in fragmentary but consistent detail. Servants testified about cash passed in hallways. Tradesmen admitted to arrangements with the lady of the house. Attorneys noted that their clients had arrived at initial consultations with funds set aside from household management. The language was always vague, always euphemistic, but the pattern was unmistakable. The second method was jewelry duplication. A wealthy Gilded Age wife might own jewels worth tens of thousands of dollars, necklaces, brooches, tiaras, earrings, and bracelets given to her by her husband or inherited from her family. Under coverture, these pieces technically belonged to her husband, but possession created a practical gray zone. The wife wore the jewels. The wife stored the jewels. The wife decided when they appeared in public. A woman planning her exit could commission a paste copy of a valuable piece, a replica made from glass, base metals, and colored crystals. A skilled jeweler could produce a paste copy that was visually indistinguishable from the original at conversational distance. The cost of a good paste copy ranged from $50 to $200. The original could then be sold discreetly through a broker, yielding hundreds or thousands of dollars in cash. The risk was real. A husband who inspected his wife's jewel box, or who had the pieces appraised, would discover the substitution immediately. But husbands rarely inspected their wives' jewelry. The pieces appeared at dinners and balls, where candlelight was forgiving, and no one examined a necklace with a jeweler's loupe. The deception could last for years. The third method involved servants. A trusted lady's maid, a housekeeper, or a butler could serve as a human bank. Cash skimmed from household accounts or received from the sale of jewelry could be entrusted to a servant who held it, carried it, and delivered it on instruction. Servants were invisible to the legal system. They were not audited. They were not deposed unless a case went to trial. And their loyalty, in many cases, it was to the wife who managed their daily lives rather than to the husband who signed their checks. The sums involved could be substantial. A lady's maid earning $20 to $40 per month might carry hundreds of dollars in her mistress's cash, tucked into the lining of a travel case or concealed in a sewing basket. The arrangement was built on trust, and that trust was earned over years of shared daily intimacy. The maid who dressed you each morning, who knew when you had been weeping, who heard the arguments through the walls, was the person you relied on when you needed to hide money from the man who owned your life. The fourth method was the natal family pipeline. A woman's birth family, if sympathetic, could provide covert financial support that bypassed the husband entirely. A father or brother could deposit money in a trust. A mother could hand cash to a trusted intermediary. These transactions were difficult to trace because they occurred outside the marital household and involved no documents that bore the wife's name. The problem was that not all natal families were sympathetic. Many fathers and brothers viewed a daughter's marriage as a completed transaction. The dowry had been paid. The alliance had been made. A divorce would embarrass the family, disrupt business relationships, and invite scandal. Some families actively sided with the husband. Others simply refused to get involved. But when a natal family did help, the support could be decisive. Court records from the period contain oblique references to family contributions and gifts from relatives that funded the initial stages of a divorce proceeding. The money arrived quietly, and often carried by hand, never acknowledged in writing. These four methods, skimming, duplication, servant banking, and natal family support, were not alternatives. They were used in combination, layered on top of each other over months and years of patient accumulation. A woman planning to leave her husband did not wake up one morning and decide to act. She began preparing years in advance, setting aside small amounts, testing the loyalty of her servants, sounding out her family, identifying a sympathetic lawyer. The process was slow. It was dangerous. Discovery could mean violence, confinement, or the loss of access to one's children. And it required a kind of sustained deception that demanded extraordinary nerve. But it worked. Slowly, invisibly, one inflated grocer's bill at a time. Its women built the financial means to buy their own freedom. Chapter 5. The lady's maid who carried the letters. The person, a Gilded Age wife, trusted most in the world, was not her mother, her sister, or her priest, but the servant who dressed her every morning. This was not sentimentality, it was operational necessity. The lady's maid occupied a unique position in the household. She was physically close to her mistress for hours each day, during dressing, during hair arrangement, during the long intervals between social engagements when the wife was confined to her private rooms. She traveled with her mistress. She slept near her mistress. She knew the state of her mistress's health, her moods, her bruises, and her correspondence. And critically, she moved freely through spaces that the husband did not monitor. A lady's maid could carry a letter from the wife's bedroom to a postbox on the street without attracting notice. She could deliver a sealed envelope to an attorney's office during an errand. She could receive a reply and return it tucked inside a parcel of fabric or a hat box. The physical mechanics of communication, which we take for granted in the age of the telephone and the email, were in the 1890s a matter of paper, ink, and human feet. Someone had to carry the message, and that someone was almost always the maid. The Brokaw separation trial of 1909 through 1910 offers an extraordinary window into this hidden infrastructure. Sidney Woods, a butler who had served in the Brokaw household, testified about the daily operations of a dysfunctional marriage in granular detail. He described the cocktails that were served in teacups to conceal Isaac Brokaw's drinking. He described the tension between husband and wife. He described the atmosphere of surveillance and control that pervaded the house. Woods's testimony revealed what every servant in every great house already knew. Servants saw everything. They heard the arguments. They witnessed the violence. They cleaned up the evidence. They opened the doors at 3 a.m. when the husband came home, reeking of another woman's perfume. And when the marriage collapsed, they were the ones who knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically, and sometimes nearly literally. For a wife planning her escape, the cooperation of key servants was essential. The maid carried messages. The cook provided alibis for missing household funds. Now, the coachman transported trunks that might contain hidden valuables. The network of domestic employees functioned as an underground railroad of information and resources, operating beneath the notice of the husband. But servants were vulnerable. They could be fired without notice. They could be denied references, which amounted to professional destruction. A husband who suspected his wife's maid of carrying secret correspondence could dismiss her instantly and replace her with someone loyal to him. The servants who helped their mistresses took genuine risks, and they did so for wages that rarely exceeded $40 a month. Beyond the household, a broader network of women provided the intelligence and encouragement that made escape conceivable. Suffrage organizations, though primarily focused on the vote, served as informal clearinghouses for information about divorce law, sympathetic attorneys, and safe housing. Church circles, women's clubs, and charitable societies created spaces where wives could speak to other women who had faced similar situations. The information shared in these networks was practical and specific. Which lawyers would take a married woman's case? Which judges were sympathetic? Which states offered the most favorable terms? The legal system itself posed a structural challenge that required creative workaround. Because a married woman under coverture could not enter a contract, she could not formally retain an attorney. The solution was the legal concept of the next friend, a person, usually a male relative or sympathetic acquaintance, who formally hired the lawyer on the wife's behalf. The next friend signed the retainer agreement, paid the initial fees and appeared on the court documents as the party of record. The wife's name appeared only as the person on whose behalf the next friend acted. This legal fiction was essential. Without it, no married woman under coverture could have accessed the courts at all. But it came with its own complications. The next friend had to be willing. He had to be discreet. He had to be financially capable of bearing the initial costs. And he had to be willing to face the social consequences of publicly facilitating a woman's divorce. Finding the right attorney was itself an act of espionage. A wife could not simply walk into a law office on Broadway and announce that she wished to divorce her husband. The visit would be noticed. The consultation would become gossip. The husband might learn of it within hours. Instead, the initial contact was typically made through an intermediary, the maid, the next friend, a sympathetic relative who visited the attorney's office, described the situation in general terms, and arranged a private meeting. These meetings often took place in locations outside the normal social geography of the wife's daily life: a rented room, a physician's office, a church vestry. The wife arrived discreetly, often veiled, and the consultation was conducted with the understanding that everything discussed was potentially discoverable in court. The attorney's first question was always the same: do you have money? Not, do you have grounds? Not, do you have witnesses? Do you have money? Because without money, nothing else mattered. The legal system existed to serve those who could pay for access to it. A woman without funds was a woman without options, no matter how compelling her case. And so the question came back, as it always did, to the hidden accounts, the inflated bills, the paste copies, and the loyal maid who carried it all in the lining of her coat. Chapter 6, 1,200 Miles to Freedom. When the Baroness de Stewers boarded a westbound train with her maid, her dog, and a man the newspapers would call her lover, she knew her family would never speak to her again. The train carried her from New York's Grand Central Depot across the farmland of Pennsylvania, through the industrial belt of Ohio and Indiana, across the Mississippi River, and onto the open prairies of the Dakota Territory. The journey took roughly 48 hours, but by the time the Baroness arrived in Sioux Falls in 1891, she had traveled nearly 1,200 miles from the world she knew. Sioux Falls in the early 1890s was a city of roughly 10,000 people, built on the falls of the Big Sioux River and sustained by quartzite quarrying, agriculture, and an industry that no one had planned but everyone profited from: divorce. South Dakota's liberal divorce laws had attracted Eastern wives since the late 1880s. The state's 90-day residency requirement was the shortest in the nation. Its grounds for divorce were the broadest, and its courts staffed by judges who understood the economic value of the divorce trade, processed cases with efficiency and discretion. By the early 1890s, the divorce colony had become Sioux Falls's most lucrative tourist attraction. The women arrived at the Cataract House Hotel, a respectable establishment on Phillips Avenue that offered steam heat, running water, and rates of $3 per day. For a woman accustomed to the splendors of Fifth Avenue, the Cataract House was modest. For a woman who had just spent years scraping together every dollar she possessed, $3 a day for 90 days, roughly $270, was a calculation that had been made and remade 100 times before she boarded the train. Across the street from the courthouse, 38 law firms advertised their services to arriving divorce seekers. The attorneys of Sioux Falls had built their practices around the specific needs of Eastern women: rapid case preparation, Discreet proceedings and settlement negotiations conducted by telegraph with husband's lawyers in New York. The purple quartzite courthouse where the decrees were issued became known, with the particular irony of the frontier, as the Temple of Freedom. Women who had spent years trapped in marble palaces found their liberation in a building made of stone, quarried from the Dakota prairie. The Baroness de Stewars was one of the colony's most sensational residents. Born into the Astor family, one of New York's wealthiest and most socially rigid dynasties, she had married a Dutch baron and found the marriage intolerable. Her arrival in Sioux Falls with a male companion generated headlines that her family found unbearable. The Astors disowned her. New York society closed its doors. The price of her freedom was the permanent loss of the world she had been raised in. Her story was dramatic, but not unique. Flora Bigelow Dodge arrived in Sioux Falls in 1903 with her 2 children and, in a detail that the newspapers found endlessly amusing, a flock of chickens. Flora was the daughter of John Bigelow, the distinguished diplomat, editor, and president of the New York Public Library. She had married a man whose behavior had become intolerable, and she had done what the system demanded, saved her money, found her lawyer, made her plan, and boarded a westbound train. The chickens were practical. Flora intended to keep a house during her residency rather than stay at a hotel, and chickens provided eggs. But they also symbolized something the newspapers did not quite grasp. Flora Bigelow Dodge, raised in one of New York's most cultivated households, was willing to raise poultry in a Dakota winter to escape her marriage. The gap between her upbringing and her circumstances measured the depth of her desperation. Between 1891 and 1908, hundreds of women made this same journey. They came from New York, from Philadelphia, from Boston, from Chicago. They came from mansions and brownstones and respectable middle-class homes. They came with their maids and their children and their carefully accumulated savings. They came because Sioux Falls offered something that New York would not, a legal mechanism for ending a marriage that had become a prison. The colony operated in a strange twilight between secrecy and spectacle. The women sought discretion, but the newspapers sought headlines. Reporters from the New York papers stationed themselves in Sioux Falls during the social season, filing stories about which society wife had been spotted at the Cataract House, which husband had dispatched private detectives to surveil his fleeing spouse, and which attorney had filed a new complaint. The private detectives were a constant presence. Husbands who wished to contest a divorce or who sought leverage in settlement negotiations hired Pinkerton agents or independent investigators to follow their wives. The detectives watched the hotels. They noted who visited whom. They documented any behavior that could be used to undermine a wife's petition, particularly any suggestion of improper conduct with another man. For the women of the colony, this surveillance added a layer of anxiety to an already precarious situation. They had spent years accumulating the money to reach Sioux Falls. They had endured the social stigma of departure. They had traveled 1,200 miles from everything they knew. And now they had to survive 90 days under the eyes of men paid to find evidence that could destroy them. The stakes could not have been higher. A successful divorce meant freedom, financial independence, and the chance to rebuild a life. A failed petition meant a return to the marriage with no money, no allies, and a husband who now knew exactly what his wife had been planning. Everything depended on those 90 days. And everything that had come before, the skimmed accounts, the paste jewelry, the loyal maid, the sympathetic family, the next friend, the secret attorney, had been in service of this single, terrifying window of opportunity. In Chapter 7, The Woman Who Broke the Dam. In 1895, Alva Vanderbilt did something no woman of her rank had ever survived. She divorced her husband and refused to disappear. The Vanderbilt divorce was the earthquake that cracked the social foundation of the Gilded Age. Other women had divorced before. Other women of wealth had sought legal separation. But no woman of Alva's stature, the wife of William Kissam Vanderbilt, the mistress of Marble House and Petit Chateau, the mother of the most eligible young woman in America, had ever walked away from her marriage and demanded to be treated not as a pariah, but as a victor. The grounds were adultery. William Kissam Vanderbilt had conducted an affair with Nellie Neustretter, a relationship that Alva had documented with the methodical precision of a detective building a prosecution. The evidence was sufficient. The case was strong. But the strength of the case was almost beside the point. What mattered was Alva's willingness to use it. In the calculus of Gilded Age society, a wife who divorced her husband for adultery was the one who bore the stigma. The husband's infidelity was regrettable, but expected. Men had appetites. The wife's decision to make it public was the unforgivable act. She had broken the code of silence that allowed the great families to maintain their facades. She had aired private business in public. She had chosen her own freedom over the collective interest in pretending that everything was fine. Alva understood this calculus perfectly. She had been part of the system long enough to know exactly how it worked. And she chose to break it anyway. The settlement reflected the magnitude of the rupture. Alva received $10 million, a fortune that would translate to roughly $300 million in today's currency. She retained custody of her 3 children, Consuelo, William Jr., and Harold. She kept Marble House. She kept her position as one of the wealthiest women in the country, but she lost the one thing that Gilded Age society valued above money: social acceptance. The doors that had been opened to Mrs. William K. Vanderbilt closed to Mrs. Alva Vanderbilt, divorcee. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Invitations stopped arriving. The 400, the social register that she had fought to enter, erased her name. Alva's response was characteristic. She did not retreat. She did not apologize. She did not accept the role of penitent exile that society had assigned to divorced women. Instead, she remarried. In January of 1896, less than a year after her divorce, Alva married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, the son of the banker, August Belmont. The marriage was strategic, as all of Alva's decisions were. Belmont was wealthy, socially connected, and willing to accept a divorced woman as his wife. The remarriage was itself a calculated affront. It announced that Alva would not accept diminished status. It demonstrated that divorce did not have to mean social death, and it sent a message to every unhappy wife in every great house in America: it can be done. Alva later acknowledged, with the bluntness that was her trademark, that she had married William Vanderbilt for his money. She did not apologize for this. She understood that in a system where women could not earn, invest, or hold wealth independently, marriage was the only available financial strategy. Her first marriage was a business decision. Her divorce was a business decision. Her second marriage was a business decision. The difference between Alva and most of her contemporaries was not that she played the game differently. It was that she admitted she was playing it. The effect on other women was profound, though it unfolded slowly. Alva's divorce did not immediately open the floodgates, but it shifted the calculation. Before Alva, a Gilded Age wife contemplating divorce could expect total social destruction. After Alva, she could expect severe social damage, but possible survival. The difference between destruction and damage was enough to change minds. In the years following the Vanderbilt divorce, the rate of divorce filings among the upper classes increased steadily. The Sioux Falls colony grew. The number of women seeking legal counsel rose. The taboo did not vanish, but it weakened, and every crack in the taboo could be traced back to the woman who had refused to disappear. The mansion she had built to display her husband's wealth would eventually serve a very different purpose. But that part of the story was still 20 years away. Chapter 8. Cocktails in teacups and pheasants by the thousand. The Brokaw separation trial gave America a daily newspaper serial about what Gilded Age marriages actually looked like behind closed doors. The trial began in 1909 and stretched into 1910. Isaac Vale Brokaw, a wealthy clothing manufacturer, and his wife Mary Blair Brokaw, the daughter of a prominent Washington family, fought their battle in open court with a ferocity that delighted the press and horrified polite society. Every day brought new testimony. Every detail was more astonishing than the last. And for the first time, the American public could see, in the precise language of sworn depositions, exactly how the economics of a Gilded Age marriage functioned. The cocktails and teacups became the trial's signature detail. Servants testified that Isaac Brokaw drank heavily, but insisted that his drinks be served in teacups so that visitors would not see him consuming alcohol. The deception was trivial and absurd, but it captured something essential about the Gilded Age marriage. The obsession with appearances extended to the most intimate corners of daily life. Even alone in his own home, a man of Brokaw's standing could not be seen holding a cocktail glass. The financial testimony was more revealing still. Brokaw claimed under oath that his annual income was between $33,000 and $45,000 per year. This figure struck observers as implausibly low for a man who maintained a Fifth Avenue residence, a country estate, and the lifestyle that went with both. The numbers told a story of deliberate financial concealment, a husband minimizing his reported income to limit his wife's potential settlement. Against this backdrop, the details of the household's expenditures took on a forensic significance. The $10,000 spent on telegrams, the 1,000 to 1,500 pheasants that Brokaw kept on his country estate, birds that required gamekeepers, feeding, and a specially maintained habitat, the polo pony track that he had constructed and maintained. Each detail was a data point in a portrait of excess that contradicted his claims of modest means. Mary Blair Brokaw's attorneys used these details with surgical precision. If Mr. Brokaw's income was truly only $45,000 per year, they asked, how did he account for the $10,000 in telegram expenses alone? How did he fund the maintenance of more than 1,000 pheasants? How did he pay for the polo facility? Either Mr. Brokaw was lying about his income, or he was spending far beyond his means. Neither answer served his case. To Mary's demand was $60,000 per year in alimony, a figure that exceeded her husband's stated income by as much as $27,000. The demand was deliberately aggressive. It was calculated to force a full disclosure of Brokaw's actual finances and to establish, on the public record, the true scale of the wealth that the marriage had generated. The trial also exposed the daily texture of marital misery with an intimacy that earlier proceedings had avoided. Servants described the household atmosphere in detail, the tension between husband and wife, the arguments that echoed through the corridors, the periods of stony silence that could last for days, the children who witnessed all of it and were powerless to change any of it. Sidney Woods, the Brokaw butler, even provided testimony that went beyond the usual servant's account. He described the operational mechanics of the household, who paid for what, who controlled the accounts, how money moved through the domestic system. His testimony inadvertently revealed the financial architecture that kept wives dependent. The husband approved all expenditures. The wife managed daily operations but could not authorize payments, and the entire system was designed so that no money passed through the wife's hands without the husband's knowledge. This was coverture in action, not the abstract legal doctrine that scholars debated, but the lived daily reality that determined whether a woman could buy a train ticket. Mary Blair Brokaw refused all offers of reconciliation. This refusal was itself significant. In most separation cases of the era, its judges strongly encouraged reconciliation, and wives who refused were viewed with suspicion. Mary's refusal signaled that she had calculated the costs, financial, social, and personal, and determined that freedom at any price was preferable to continued marriage. The Brokaw trial was covered by every major newspaper in New York and many beyond. The daily revelations became a form of public education. Americans who had never thought about the financial mechanics of marriage suddenly understood, through the specificity of sworn testimony, exactly how the system worked. The cocktails and teacups, the hidden income, the 1,000 pheasants, the wife who could manage a vast household but could not write a check. The trial did not change the law, but it changed the conversation. And in the slow, grinding transformation of social norms, conversations matter more than statutes. Chapter 9: The Colony That Died and the Freedom That Lived. In 1908, South Dakota changed one number in its residency law and shut down the most important escape route for unhappy wives in America. The number was simple. The state legislature extended the residency requirement for divorce petitioners from 90 days to 1 year. The change was driven by a coalition of religious groups, moral reformers, and South Dakota residents who had grown tired of their state's reputation as the nation's divorce capital. The reformers argued that the 90-day window made a mockery of marriage. They argued that it attracted scandal. They argued that it damaged the state's character. What they did not argue, and because it was not the kind of argument that played well in a legislative chamber, was what the change would mean for the women who relied on Sioux Falls as their path to freedom. The effect was immediate and devastating. A 90-day stay was financially manageable for a woman who had spent years accumulating a hidden fund. A 1-year stay was not. The cost of living in Sioux Falls for 12 months, including housing, food, legal fees, and miscellaneous expenses, was roughly 5 to 6 times the cost of a 90-day stay. For most women, the math no longer worked. The pipeline that had carried hundreds of wives from New York to South Dakota went dry almost overnight. Between 1891 and 1908, the period of the 90-day rule, South Dakota had issued 7,108 divorce decrees. For a state with a population of roughly 300,000, this was an extraordinary number. The divorce colony had been Sioux Falls' most profitable export, generating revenue for hotels, restaurants, law firms, and every other business that served the visiting wives. The colony's death was swift. Within 2 years of the law change, the Cataract House had lost most of its long-term guests. The 38 law firms that had clustered near the courthouse saw their caseloads plummet. The Temple of Freedom processed fewer petitions each year. By 1910, the Sioux Falls divorce colony was effectively dead. But the women who needed to leave their marriages did not stop needing to leave. The demand did not disappear, it relocated. Nevada, with its own liberal divorce laws and short residency requirements, it became the new destination. Reno would replace Sioux Falls as the national symbol of marital dissolution. The geography changed. The underlying dynamic did not. And something larger was already happening. The thousands of individual divorces that had been processed through Sioux Falls between 1891 and 1908 had cumulatively shifted the boundaries of public opinion. Each divorce had been a scandal. Each scandal had been discussed. Each discussion had normalized, by the smallest possible increment, the idea that a woman might leave a bad marriage without forfeiting her right to exist in society. The suffrage movement was drawing on the same energy. The women who had fought to escape their marriages and the women who fought for the vote were not always the same people, but they shared a common understanding that legal rights without economic and political power were decorative. The right to own property meant nothing if you had no property. The right to sign a contract meant nothing if no one would contract with you. And the right to vote, when it eventually came, would mean nothing if women remained economically dependent on men who could control their access to every resource. The connection between the divorce movement and the suffrage movement was not theoretical, it was personal. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, the woman who had shattered the divorce taboo in 1895, was about to become the most important financial backer the suffrage movement had ever had. Her money, the same money she had extracted from her first marriage through a combination of legal strategy and sheer force of will, would fund the final push for the 19th Amendment. The colony at Sioux Falls was dead, but the freedom it had helped create was about to take a form that its founders could never have imagined. Chapter 10, From Divorce Court to the White House Gates. The woman who had once skimmed household accounts to hire a divorce lawyer was now writing checks to finance the picketing of the president. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont's transformation from Gilded Age socialite to militant suffragist is one of the most remarkable second acts in American history. After the death of Oliver Belmont in 1908, Alva found herself widowed, wealthy, and freed from the social constraints that marriage imposed, even on the most independent women. She was 60 years old. She had spent her entire adult life navigating a system designed to deny women power, and she was done navigating. She turned to the suffrage movement with the same strategic ferocity she had brought to her divorce. Her target was the National Woman's Party, led by Alice Paul, the most radical and confrontational wing of the suffrage movement. While the mainstream suffragists of the National American Woman Suffrage Association pursued a state-by-state strategy of gradual persuasion, Paul and her allies demanded a constitutional amendment and were willing to go to prison for it. Alva gave them the money to do it. Her donations to the National Woman's Party totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years of the campaign. She funded the organization's headquarters. She financed its newspaper, The Suffragist. She bankrolled the picketing of the White House that began in January of 1917, when women stood at the gates holding banners demanding that President Wilson support the suffrage amendment. The picketers were arrested, they were jailed, they were force-fed when they went on hunger strikes, and Alva paid their bail, hired their lawyers, and kept the operation going through months of confrontation that shocked the nation. Marble House, the $11 million monument to Vanderbilt wealth that Alva had built during her first marriage, became a staging ground for suffrage rallies. The irony was exquisite and intentional. The house that had symbolized a woman's ornamental captivity now hosted speeches demanding women's political freedom. The marble walls that had witnessed Alva's powerlessness now echoed with the voices of women claiming power. The 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920. It guaranteed women the right to vote. Alva Belmont had spent more money, more energy, and more personal capital on its passage than perhaps any other single individual. She had traveled the full arc. From a bride who had married for money in a system that gave her no other option, to a divorcee who had bought her freedom with funds secretly accumulated under coverture, to a philanthropist who had turned her personal suffering into a political revolution. The 12 cents on a grocer's bill had become hundreds of thousands of dollars for women's suffrage. The scale had changed. The principle had not. Chapter 11. The Glitter and the Gold. Consuelo Vanderbilt endured 25 years of a loveless marriage before she finally called her tiara what it was: a headache. Her memoir, published in 1953 under the title The Glitter and the Gold, is one of the most remarkable personal accounts of the Gilded Age marriage system. In it, Consuelo described with cool clarity the transaction that her parents had made, trading her youth and beauty for a ducal coronet and an English estate that consumed her American fortune like a furnace consumes coal. She divorced the Duke of Marlborough in 1921. She was 44 years old. She had borne 2 sons, maintained Blenheim Palace, endured a husband who regarded her with indifference, and survived the scrutiny of English society that viewed her, always, as a purchased bride. After the divorce, she married Jacques Balsan, a French aviator and businessman, and by all accounts found the happiness that her first marriage had denied her. She lived until 1964, spending her later years between homes in France and Florida, as far as possible from the marble corridors that had defined her youth. Flora Bigelow Dodge, the woman who had raised chickens in the Dakota winter, followed her lawyer's advice to the letter. After obtaining her divorce in Sioux Falls, she was instructed never to return to New York, where her decree might be challenged by her former husband. She obeyed. She built a new life far from the city where she had been raised, far from the father who had been president of the public library, far from the social world that had been her birthright. Her freedom came with a permanent condition of exile. The Baroness de Stewars paid the highest social price of all. Disowned by the Astor family for the scandal of her divorce and the public nature of her departure, she spent the remainder of her life in France, separated by an ocean from the family and the world she had known. Her name was not spoken in Astor drawing rooms. Her story was not told. She was erased from the family narrative as thoroughly as coverture had erased her legal existence. Charlotte Astor Drayton, another Astor descendant who sought divorce, was disinherited by her father. The punishment was delivered with the blunt efficiency that characterized the Astor approach to family disgrace. Charlotte had violated the code. The code demanded consequences. The money was withdrawn. The relationship was severed. Each woman's ending was different. Consuelo found love. Flora found stability. The Baroness found isolation. Charlotte found poverty. But each ending confirmed the same truth. The system extracted its price from every woman who dared to leave. Freedom in the Gilded Age was not free. It cost years of secret preparation, thousands of carefully accumulated dollars, the loyalty of servants who risked their own positions, and the willingness to accept a future defined by exile and social diminishment. The women who escaped did not escape intact. They escaped alive. That was the best the system would offer them, and yet they took it. Every one of them took it. They chose the chicken coop in Dakota over the marble cage in New York. They chose disgrace over captivity. They chose an uncertain future over a certain misery. And in doing so, they demonstrated something that no legal doctrine or social convention could erase: that the human desire for autonomy is stronger than any system designed to suppress it. Chapter 12. The Door That Money Opens. New York did not repeal its adultery statute until November 22, 2024. Let that date register. 2024. 129 years after Alva Vanderbilt used that same statute to divorce her husband, New York finally removed adultery as the sole grounds for fault-based divorce. For more than a century after the Gilded Age, the legal framework that had trapped those women remained partially intact, a fossil embedded in the bedrock of American family law. This is not an anomaly, it is a pattern. The vestiges of coverture and its philosophical descendants persisted in American law far longer than most people realize. Women were not regularly allowed to serve on juries until the 1960s. The Supreme Court did not rule that women could not be automatically excluded from jury pools until 1975. Marital rape was not criminalized in all 50 states until 1993. That is not a misprint. 1993. A husband could legally force himself on his wife in some American states until the year that the World Wide Web was born. No-fault divorce, the legal principle that allows either spouse to end a marriage without proving wrongdoing, did not exist in all 50 states until 2010, when New York became the last state to adopt it. Before that year, a New York woman who wanted to divorce a husband who was cruel but not adulterous faced the same legal obstacle that Flora Bigelow Dodge had faced a century earlier. These dates are not trivia. They are evidence. They demonstrate that the system the Gilded Age wives fought against did not end with the Gilded Age. It evolved. It adapted. It changed its language and softened its edges. But its fundamental logic, that legal rights without economic means are meaningless, persisted across decades and into living memory. The Married Women's Property Acts were a beginning, not an ending. They gave women the right to own property, but did not give them property. They gave women the right to sign contracts, but did not give them the economic standing that makes contracts useful. They gave women the right to keep their wages, but did not address the reality that most married women did not earn wages. The gap between the law on paper and the law in practice was the gap that the Gilded Age wives exploited with their inflated grocer's bills and paste jewelry. And it is the same gap that persists in different forms in the 21st century. Today, the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument stands on Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. It is the former headquarters of the National Woman's Party, the organization that Alva Belmont funded with the fortune she extracted from her first marriage. The building is a museum now. Visitors can see the banners that the suffragists carried to the White House gates. They can read the words of Alice Paul. Though they can stand in the rooms where Alva Belmont wrote the checks that kept the movement alive. The monument exists because some women turned their captivity into a cause that outlived them. Alva Belmont did not live to see the Equal Rights Amendment passed. It has still not been passed. But she lived long enough to see the 19th Amendment ratified, to see women vote, and to know that the money she had once hidden from her first husband had helped change the Constitution of the United States. The Gilded Age wives understood a truth that remains as relevant today as it was in 1895. A locked door and an empty pocket produce the same result. The right to leave means nothing without the means to go. The right to speak means nothing without the resources to be heard. Legal equality is a necessary condition of freedom, but it is not a sufficient one. The sufficient condition is economic power. The women who skimmed the grocer's bill, who copied their diamonds in paste, who trusted their maids with their lives, who raised chickens in the Dakota winter, who sat in the purple quartzite courthouse and waited for a judge to say the word "granted." Those women understood this before the law did, before the legislators did, before the reformers did. They understood it in their bones, in the lining of their coats where the hidden cash was sewn, in the 12-cent discrepancy on a household bill that no one thought to question, in the quiet, sustained, and dangerous work of buying their own freedom in a system that was designed to make freedom unaffordable. The door that money opens is the only door that matters. They knew it then. We are still learning it now.